Hi there, I'm Nafisa Latic and this is Across the Balkans. On the show today, a landslide win for Kosovo's anti-establishment party. Albin Kurti and his self-determination movement have secured the largest electoral victory in Kosovo's post-war history. It's Kurti's second win in less than 2 years. But will he be able to translate this success into longer-term stability? Well, there's certainly no shortage of challenges that need tackling, from unemployment to COVID-19, and not least of all, Kosovo's decades-long territorial dispute with Serbia. Melinda Nucifora was there as the ballots were cast in Pristina.
When it comes to politics in Kosovo, 35-year-old Bleta Shabani says it feels like one step forward, 2 steps back.
When Kosovo gained independence, did you think that was the hard part done? Are you surprised by how difficult it has been for Kosovo to govern itself?
We have gone through a lot of pain and sacrifice within the history, and a lot of generations and generations were dreaming about the Independence Day, and when that day happened, we had a lot of dreams and a lot of hopes. But seeing it from today's perspective of all those years that has passed by since the Independence Day happened, let's say that we are not quite happy.
Bleta, like many young people in Kosovo, is pinning her hopes of a better future on the progressive political party Vetevendosje, known in English as the Self-Determination Movement.
So what is it about the self-determination movement that you think is different? What can they do differently this time around?
They have chosen politics as their path to serve their people and serve their country rather than, getting wealthier. And I truly believe that the new alternative will somehow fight the corruption who can consider the disease of our society.
There was never much doubt that the self-determination movement would win Sunday's parliamentary elections. In the lead-up to the Valentine's Day poll, the left-leaning anti-establishment party had been feeling the love that rallies right across the country. It's won the highest percentage of votes of any political party in the country's history, but no government has ever held on to power for a full term.
Kosovo is so fragile and it cannot endure ongoing elections year by year, month by month. So definitely this country is going to suffer if we don't have a stable government.
When the self-determination movement won the 2019 election, it took 4 months to find a coalition partner and form a government, only to have the whole administration crumble 2 months later. It's believed that differences within the coalition regarding talks with Serbia contributed to the collapse.
Our governments are losing their power because of this issue. Like 2 recent governments, they lost power because of these issues.
Kosovo declared independence from Serbia in 2008. But more than a decade on, only about half of the United Nations member states recognise it as a sovereign state. That's because the 2 countries are still negotiating the details of their split. If Kosovo is going to put its political turmoil behind it, analysts say the new government must make talks with Serbia its top priority.
This is the biggest challenge for the new government. They have to have a clear idea what will be the, so to say, the red lines in these negotiations. It is a clear condition from all our allies, even from the US, from European Union, that we have to come up with an agreement with Serbia.
But just who will lead those negotiations? The self-determination movement's leader, Albin Kurti, isn't allowed to be elected as a member of parliament. He's banned until September as punishment for releasing tear gas in the chamber in 2015. Despite his preclusion, his party insists he can still serve as Prime Minister, His opponents say it's unconstitutional.
Where this is leading us is definitely this is going to ending up at the Constitutional Court, where probably his role as Prime Minister or his election is going to be disputed.
I ask Blerta what she makes of the controversy.
I find it crazy, to be honest, but I mean, he's playing with all the possible cards that he has in the table, so...
There are whispers floating around like the snow here in Kosovo that Kurti could call another election in September to formally declare his mandate as Prime Minister. If he does, it would be the country's 7th election in just over a decade.
It is a wide-known fact for us economists, and it's empirically proven that the more frequent the election cycles are, the more unstable politically the country is, and that affects a lot the business environment.
The World Bank says Kosovo's economy contracted more than 8% last year and estimates that about 18% of the population now live below the poverty line.
It is frustrating for businesses because projects are let's say, kept frozen or kept in pause, and the long-term planning and long-term vision is frequently interrupted.
Unemployment stands at about 30%, forcing more and more people to leave the country and try their luck overseas.
Unfortunately, I had friends or friend of my friends who had to travel and had to move, living abroad in order to be more valued in terms of working conditions. And I know that a lot of people, they are quite qualified. I mean, they get second level of degree, and then they still have to do, waitressing or...
Because I've heard there's the joke in Kosovo that the coffee is so good because it's made by someone who has a master's degree.
Yeah, that's true. It's painful, yeah.
And what about you? Why do you stay in Kosovo?
I actually feel that, someone must stay here and, contribute in one way or in another, so... And I love my country. Yeah.
And what better reason to stay? Melinda Nucifora, TRT World, Pristina.
My guest today is Agon Maliqi. He's a policy analyst and also the co-founder of Zbunker, a current affairs blog in Kosovo. He joins me now from Albania's capital, Tirana. Agon, thanks so much for joining us here on Across the Balkans. Big changes happening in Kosovo. What does this result mean, and can Albin Kurti translate his party's victory into the government that will last?
Yes, obviously this was the biggest political shift that Kosovo has seen, in decades. This was the largest vote share that any political party has gotten since after the war, even beating Kosovo's historic President Rugova's share from 2001. Kurti had framed these elections as a referendum against the old establishment, and in a way that that referendum has succeeded. The Kurti's list was in a way a coalition with Vjosa Osmani, who also represents this other political faction, and together they seem to be able to form a government only with ethnic minority parties, so which are obliged to be part of the government by constitution. And it seems that Kosovo will be going set towards a stable, sort of a more long-lasting government. However, there is one open issue in the next weeks or months, is the issue of whether the selection of the president, which requires a higher share of votes in parliament, so more than the 61 needed for government, the president needs 80%. So there will perhaps be some sort of discussion.
Right, let me just jump in here. So does this mean if the Self-Determination Party and this new government is not able to provide president, that we might be looking at new elections in Kosovo?
Yes, theoretically, yes, because the inability of the new parliament to elect a new president triggers automatic, to elect a new president triggers automatic new elections. But I have a sense that some sort of consensus may be achieved with one of the new opposition parties because nobody, I believe, has an interest in new elections, at this current moment. Neither Kurti, who has really won a landslide, nor the opposition, which is really is still in shock and trying to recover from the situation.
So big comeback for Albin Kurti. He was already a prime minister for a 50 or so days, if I'm not mistaken. Would you say that his party in some way benefited from this growing hunger for change and the frustration at the political system, which saw Kurti removed from power last year?
No, absolutely. This was a protest vote. So I would characterize this like a half of the vote share coming as a really strong pro-Kurti vote. Whereas the rest, because only a year and a half ago, Kurti had double less of the votes. So what changed within a year? And obviously, the downfall of the government was a very unpopular move, and and it triggered a lot of anger. I think the pandemic, also the economic crisis, also played a role. So Kurti was sort of the address that capitalized on decades long of anger. The challenge now is to translate that into a political agenda, and the expectations are too high, and this is now also going to present a problem for him. Because these swing voters who brought him to power massively, I think they have expectations, and they will hold Kurti accountable, I think, as much as they did the old elites.
Right, big expectations, as you say, from the new government and many challenges ahead. I mean, Kosovo lost the government in the middle of the pandemic. The vaccination rollout is yet to begin. Will Kurti be able to deliver all his promises? And what's his plan? How does he plan to tackle the pandemic itself?
No, I don't. The campaign was not run much on concrete issues and promises. It was more of this, general change message. We cannot say much based on what was said in the campaign. I do think that they have set the bar a bit too high in the sense of, in terms of the expectations. Realistically, Kosovo faces more structural problems that are not necessarily only related to the old governing elite. On the economy. It will take some time for any kind of measures and the damage has already been done. On the rule of law, which is and anti-corruption measures, which is one of the key issues that drove his agenda. That is also, something that cannot be resolved by a government. It requires long-term judicial reforms. But also the third key issue, the one which actually brought down 2 or 3 of the past governments, was the issue of dialogue with Serbia.
It seems to me that during this campaign, there's been little talk about the negotiations on how to resolve Kosovo's dispute with Serbia. But this still remains an obstacle for both countries if they want to join the EU someday, and they obviously do. So can we expect a hard stance on this from the new government? And can, Kosovo and Serbia build on the agreement signed in June in the White House that the former US president called a peace deal?
Absolutely. The issue did not emerge in the campaign at all. None of the parties wanted to touch it because they didn't want to commit to anything, or it's an unpopular issue. And Kurti has yesterday in his victory speech said that issue is not a priority for his government. They want to emphasize that they've been elected on a mandate for domestic reforms, and I think that's a signal also to the international community. He will face challenges in this regard, not only because the international community, has some expectations towards Kosovo, whether that's the Brussels dialogue or the commitments arising from the Washington agreement that you mentioned, and then to see whether Kurti follows up on some of those commitments. But also because Kosovo also has some needs to resolve this issue, because it's locked. It's isolated in a lot of fronts. It cannot join NATO. It cannot join EU. So I think Kurti will face a challenge of developing a bit more of a strategic relation with Kosovo's Western allies. And in this front, he has shown to be some would say stubborn, but others would say, like less cooperative with Western partners. And in this sense, I think Kosovo will be less predictable as a player, and this is something that will be one of the most interesting things to watch going forward.
Right. One other thing that many eyes will be looking at, Kurti favors a union between Kosovo, where 90% of the population is Albanian, and Albania. How likely is that we are going to see this happening now when he is in power, and what can we expect when it comes to that issue?
Kurti's rhetoric on that issue has changed gradually over the years. That was his main rallying call when he started his political campaign. Now he has moderated. That's a typical thing that happens with parties as the closer they get to government. Now his line is that that's still his aim, but he wants to achieve it with peaceful means, meaning not causing any regional trouble. This is something that remains to be seen. Other parties have also, who are now in opposition, have also run on this issue or mentioned a potential referendum for joining Albania. I think how this issue, this will all depend on whether Kosovo can be sort of unblocked, from its limbo right now. If Kosovo gets recognized, especially by the 5 EU countries and NATO countries, or if it gets unblocked at the UN, then I think this issue will go down in terms of the priority. But if the limbo remains, I think this issue will continue to resonate more. And even Albania seems to not have a clear EU perspective at this moment. So there is, in this public discourse, still that idea is very much alive. It's just an issue of, it really depends on the geopolitical context and how much the West can help Kosovo get out of its current sort of isolated position.
Agon Maliqi, thanks so much for that. Thanks for breaking all this down with us here on the Across the Balkans. Hope to see you soon. Let's turn our attention now from a political earthquake to a physical one. Croatia is still recovering from its magnitude 6.4 quake that struck in December. It was the strongest there in more than 100 years, and there have been hundreds of smaller aftershocks since. Now, Croatia's leaders have promised funds for reconstruction, but thousands of people who lost their homes are still living in temporary accommodation. We sent Mirna Brekalo to the epicenter in Petrinja.
Sve ono što smo radili u interesu. Mislim da je to osjećaj koji jednostavno ne možeš ni sanjati, to ne možeš ni u jednom ružnom snu imati. U stvari, doživjeli smo pakao u kojem u jednom trenutku za 20 sekundi ti se ruša svijet, ruša ti se grad, ruša ti se sve pred tvojim očima.
The mayor of Petrinja recalls the moment disaster struck. He was on this street on December 29th. The day of the devastating earthquake.
Taman kad smo došli baš ovdje, onda smo vidjeli ovu jednu ogromnu ruševinu koja se sručila u stvari na ljude, sručila se na aute i uvijek ta scena i taj flash, taj ne izlazi iz glave, izvlačeći malog klinca koji ima 4 godine, 5, spašavajući njega. Doveli smo ga ovdje do autobusne stanice. Njegov plać i poziv da mu je otac, izvlačenje i dolazak vatrogasaca. Evo, to su te scene koje čovjek ne može nikad zaboraviti. Petrinja je taj dan traumatizirana i na kraju traumatizirana svaki dan. Svaki dan potres je tu prisutan i on kao da daje poruku: ja još neću otići od vas.
The magnitude 6.4 quake destroyed buildings, displaced residents, and claimed 7 lives. Help from all over the world came to this little Croatian town, 60 kilometers from the capital Zagreb.
Ovaj grad nije nikao preko noći. On ima svoju bogatu povijest, ima svoju bogatu kulturu, tradiciju. Evo, i ono sve što smo pokazali kod te prve pomoći svakom čovjeku, gdje su se uništile ljudske sudbine, gdje su na kraju mnogi ostali bez svojih najbližih, gdje jednostavno ne postoje riječi da bi se mogle umanjiti njihova bol, ali evo, to su dani bili suosjećanja.
Almost 2 months on, devastation is still visible on every corner. More than 3,000 people don't have a roof over their head. Mayor Dumbovic is struggling to rebuild his town and dreams about how the city could be restored and improved.
Ovdje je taj dio centra grada i kad pogledate samo ovaj tu gore dio, to je Hirošima. Robna kuća koja je stajala 25 godina devastirana, ali sad evo, napokon je rušimo i grad će dobiti sasvim jedan novi izgled. Tu ćemo raditi jednu ideju središnjeg trga koji bi trebao biti jedan mali dnevni boravak Petrinjaca.
I'm on my way to the village outside Petrinja. No one lives in these houses anymore. Milan lost his cousins in the earthquake, and as a farmer he also lost his livelihood.
Pa jako sam vezan za ovaj kraj i za ovo selo i tu, otkad znam za sebe tu živim. Moj djed, pradjed, otac, svi. I ne mogu se rastati od toga. Ne mogu otići odavde nikako. Cijeli svoj život se bavim poljoprivredom i stočarstvom. Prije potresa sam imao 26 krava, 10 krmača i 10 bikova. Sad mi je ostalo 13 krava, 3 teleta i svinje su ostale. Ovo je drugo pobjeglo, nestalo i tako.
90% of the nearby villages are completely destroyed, and it's not the first time. They all had to be rebuilt after the war in the 90s. In front of houses, there are now containers. Stjepan and his family are adjusting to life in their new temporary living room.
Život nama je ovdje, ja, supruga i 11 djece. I sada plus od svega toga je i od supruge mama. Ona živi ovdje u ovoj kampici, njoj je dole isto kuća oštećena, i osoba starije životne dobi. Mora neko brinuti o njoj. Nažalost, u ono vrijeme, to kad se dogodilo, to je bilo Hirošima. Imali smo osjećaj da nestaje tlo pod nogama i danas više nikada nema.
The night after the earthquake, they built these tents. Despite their living conditions, Stjepan and his family are determined not to leave their homeland.
People all over Croatia are offering you a place to stay, but instead you are sleeping in containers and in tents. Why? Why are you choosing to stay in this place and not to leave?
Pa znate što? Majka, ona rodi svoje dijete. Majka i dijete su vezani pupčanom vrpcom. Nas je ova rodna gruda othranila, odgojila, tu smo se rodili, tu smo se stvorili. Mi ostajemo ovdje i buduća naša pokoljenja. Stoljećima smo ovdje bili i nadam se da će tako biti i dalje.
The earthquake not only damaged things above ground, it also seems to have accelerated the formation of giant sinkholes under the villages.
There are more than 80 sinkholes in the ground caused by the earthquake that struck central Croatia on December 29th. The biggest one is right here, just a couple meters away from a family's home. It's 15 meters deep and keeps getting deeper. Sinkholes like this one are a chronic obstacle to restoring critical infrastructure in the region.
The Croatian government is in charge of reconstruction, but plans have not yet been finalized as aftershocks keep rocking the area. Rebuilding for now is in the hands of the locals. They've turned this town into a construction site and hope to soon move into their houses built by their own hands. Mirna Brekalo, TRT World, Petrinja, Croatia.
Thanks for watching this episode of Across the Balkans, the show dedicated to the people, places, and stories of Southeastern Europe. Hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.